If you forget a word in conversation and it comes back to you later, that's totally normal. If it never comes back, then that's something to be concerned. You know, if you go to a room and you don't know why you were there, you don't remember, you go back to the first room, you go, oh, yep, I wanted to get a can opener. That's normal. If you go back to the room and nothing comes back and the next day you still don't know why you went there, then that's more.
Oh, yeah, my friends. Welcome to another episode of ChristianPodcast.com. Today, I'm wearing like Sunday best. What do you guys think? It's kind of like a first for me. But I thought we have Dr. Teryn Clarke on the show today. I'm like, I'm going to dress nice. Okay. So welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you on. We're going to talk about many topics, but you have a brand new book called Brain Health Action Plan. And today you're going to get to talk to a Christian audience about the brain. Okay. So Teryn, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I would have dressed fancier, but I dressed warm because I was so cold this morning.
I love it. I mean, this is the season when it's okay to dress cozy, right? If we're recording this right before Christmas, a week before Christmas, actually. So, I mean, it's my favorite time of the year. We have the Christmas sign on the screen back here. But we're not going to discuss necessarily Christmas, even though I have one topic that would be really cool as it relates to the brain and maybe the birth of Jesus. Okay, cool. So maybe if I remember, I'll bring that back to us. But Millie, how are you doing today? Welcome to the show.
I'm so happy. Thank you, doctor, for your time. And I'm just, opening my heart and receive today. I believe that God is going to talk to us today and asking for his help so I can, whatever I learned today, and I can apply that in my life, because we can have all the knowledge of this world, but if we don't act, we're not going to change, and we need to move, we need to act. To be someone, to improve. We're talking about improvement, right? But thank you so much.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm so happy to be here. And, life gets so busy, but it's so nice to sit down and talk about the good things, like what we can do to improve our lives. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Okay, Teryn, so let's start right there. You have a brand new book. It's called Brain Health Action Plan. So Millie's talking about, taking action. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you come up with that idea? And let's kick it off with that.
Well, the reason behind the book is to let people know that we have way more control over whether or not we're going to develop Alzheimer's disease than we might think. Wow. And that knowledge came to me through education, but then years of taking care of patients with dementia. And I was inspired by a handful of patients that I saw who were in their late 80s and doing quite well, quite healthy in general, but just starting to have memory problems. And in this particular group of people, when I looked at their genetic profiles for their risk of Alzheimer's disease, they all had really high risk genetically of Alzheimer's disease. And in their group, based on their genetics, they should have been in my office by the time they were 80 with memory complaints. And so one particular lady's story that I highlighted in the book, she came to me at 87, still living independently, still driving. And so her brain was healthy way beyond what I would have expected her for her genetics. And that handful of people all have very similar characteristics. They happen to be living a brain healthy lifestyle because that's what they enjoy. They didn't do that intentionally necessarily, but so there are a lot of books that explain the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease and how we can modify them, because 50% of Alzheimer's disease is due to lifestyle risk factors. But what I found was missing in those was kind of breaking it down and helping people adopt those habits. It's easy to give big recommendations of, cut down sugar and exercise, but how much and when, and if you're going from 0 to 60, it's really difficult. But if people are starting at 0, there's, at the end of every chapter, just tiny little habits to start taking action, like Millie said, and moving forward to adopt those habits. So that was the reason behind the book. And then a secondary reason is a little more personal, which is that my mom had Alzheimer's disease when she was in her 60s. And so what I found when I would go to my doctor, they asked your family history. And so I'd put that my mom had Alzheimer's disease, diagnosed in her 60s. And then my dad had had a heart attack in his 50s. And so the doctors would always, look at that history and give me a really specific action plan. We're going to look at your cholesterol and blood pressure, and we're going to manage all these things and maybe talk about aspirin, and they just had an entire plan to help me lower my heart disease risk, which I appreciate. But then they would get to my mom's side of the family and say, oh, she had Alzheimer's disease pretty young. Oh. Oops. And there was no plan.
What that means.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was,
And they look at you like, oh.
Yeah, that's too bad. And so, I wanted that same amount of attention put to reducing my Alzheimer's risk because I'm probably more scared of that than heart disease, actually. And so, thankfully, I know things that can be done, but I feel like a lot of people may be going to their doctor who isn't letting them know what can be done. So the book, people can really take charge of a lot of their risk factors themselves.
Wow.
So that's why I wrote it, to kind of spread the good word that we have a lot of control over our brain health.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so this is going to be super silly. Okay, I'm from Mexico. And kind of like growing up, I mean, Mexico is advanced, okay? Not some people are, maybe I say Mexico and they're thinking, a little ranchito and people with sombreros and stuff. No, like Mexico is, it's advanced. There's universities, there's everything just for the people that are like, oh boy, what is Beto going to say? But all that to say, growing up, like my dad's a little bit kind of like that attitude of like, just drink water and you'll be okay, so you get sick of anything, just drink water, and part of it I really appreciate because in a sense, like I never grew up with like taking pills for everything, so I'm just saying all of that just to give you context that when I came to America at 24, 25 years old, I started noticing like, wow, America, like you can get medicated for every single thing. Yeah. Like they can just prescribe something for you and give you pills for everything, and my mom works, she's done it for years and years where she takes care of elderly people. And so I've been around the industry enough to notice, okay, there's a lot of pills going on at an older age, so all of that just trying to connect, with, I felt, maybe growing up, like, I think the pills are maybe damaging your brain more than they're helping, right? And that might be just a silly assumption, but that's something I kind of noticed just coming from Mexico without like all the medicine around you, right? Like just kind of like live a healthy lifestyle, right?
And that's so important. Growing up, I didn't knew one person with Alzheimer in Mexico. Right. All people are sharp. And they're working and they're still moving all the time. And when I moved here, I just go, oh my gosh, all these people, the elderly, they have, I don't know if they're in generics or like Beto was saying, all the pills, but for me it was a shock. Like, oh my gosh, I never knew this exists, like so bad.
And regardless, it's a reality, right? I mean, so one of the questions I had is like, like how early can we identify, we're forgetting things. Like sometimes I'm recording a podcast. I'm like, oh, I forgot what I wanted to say. Is that a sign? Or is that just like, oh man, just focus more. But what have you witnessed as far as like the real signs of where, you might have a memory problem?
So that's a great question because I feel like once we get to midlife, I feel like that's a universal response to not knowing where we put our keys or not being able to find the right word or going to a social event, seeing somebody you should know and not remembering their name. And it's easy, especially if you have a family history of Alzheimer's disease, but it's easy even if you don't to think, oh shoot, is this the beginning of something serious? Wow. And so some of the just generalities in terms of knowing if that's normal or not is if we understand that we do change as we age, and understanding which things change more. So one of the things that changes the most as we age is our ability to multitask, and that's kind of a subset of attention. So the younger we are, the more things we can be running concurrently. Like if we think of ourselves as a computer, we have so much RAM, and so we can run a bunch of different scripts at the same time and hold on to our progress in all of them. And decade by decade, that decreases starting in our 30s. So as we stay as busy as ever, or maybe we're even busier because now we have kids and a career and so many things that we're balancing, and then at the same time that multitasking ability is declining, then there are some scripts that are going to get dropped. And so we're going to not access a name as quickly as we would, or we're going to be not paying attention when we set down our keys. So those things are pretty typical. And a good litmus test for if it's a problem and you should ask, do memory screening or see a doctor about it would be if you forget a word in conversation and it comes back to you later, that's totally normal. If it never comes back, then that's something to be concerned. Or, if you go to a room and you don't know why you were there, you don't remember, and you go back to the first room, you go, oh, yep, I wanted to get a can opener. That's normal. If you go back to the room and nothing comes back and the next day you still don't know why you went there, then that's more. Okay. So you kind of look at busy life versus maybe, something different. And if you're particularly busy like this time of year, it's going to be really bad for everybody because we're all trying to do so many things at the same time and sit in the moment and enjoy it, which is, adding actually another task. So that's kind of how you can distinguish. But I wanted to say that I think your observations are so valid, especially seeing the U.S., which I think is such an example of too many toxins, too many drugs, food supply that's not particularly healthy, that's overprocessed as compared to a country like Mexico. And so, some of the things we might say, oh, those are simple things. No, those are pure things where the food is actually coming to us in its actual form as a food, not going to a factory, getting full of chemicals, and then coming out that can sit on the shelf for 2 years. I mean, that's clearly not a healthy way for food to transfer. And so in Mexico, you're going to have more healthy food, actually. And you didn't have the massive exposure to drugs, which we've had here, which I don't think is healthy. I think you're really wise to observe that. It's not healthy. And I see a lot of my practice, people come in on 7, 10 medications and they're not healthy. And I do ask myself, okay, are you not healthy and so you're on so many drugs? Or are you on so many drugs and that's not healthy? Because they don't seem to be getting healthy on the drugs. So if it's that they weren't healthy, I'm not sure I see them getting much better. So I really have taken a look at our medications. And 10 years ago, I said to my patients, that were like the kids of my patients. I said, by the time we're there, we'll have a medicine for dementia. I'm not that worried. 20 years, we'll have a cure, right? So I was really reliant on the medical industry to fix this problem. And then as we got farther along and I started my local hospital, we did some drug trials. And so I got to see how they worked and how they ran and what the results were and how the FDA looked at those results. And that really gave me that realization that we have to take charge of our health and not be reliant on some pill saving us 20 years down the road. But I was very much inside that United States paradigm of like medications will fix everything. It's harder to see when you're inside of it than you two seeing it externally and thinking like, this is health? Like this doesn't look like health to me. Yes. And so it took a while for me to realize, okay, we have to take care of our bodies starting way earlier so that we're avoiding all these medicines when we're 60, 70, 80. So I think your observations are spot on, and it's really hard to see that when you're a physician in the United States.
See, like you go to places like Mother's, Sprouts, and you see all the kinds of vitamins, and it's a whole world. Like, I get overwhelmed.
Yeah,
I know it's good for you, and like now I'm on my 40s. And I know that probably my body doesn't process things like collagen, right? So I need to take collagen. Well, that powder is processed, that pills are processed. Where I can find this on a real thing, So I go back and I do bone broth and things like that to supplement that,
I agree. I think that's one of the things. I mean, you can see it externally from Mexico. You can see it externally from Europe. But in America, we very much take healthy things and then process them or remove the healthy parts and then sell them back to people. So I think that applies to vitamins. And our food is stripped of a lot of its nutrition. And it's so stripped that then we need to take vitamins to try to get back what should have been in the food. because the soil is stripped. It applies to exercise. I mean, we take exercise out of our lives in terms of work, in terms of driving everywhere, and then we have to sell it back in terms of a gym membership. And so I think it applies to a lot of things in our lives that are processed. Like our exercise is processed. It's when you step back and really kind of look at everything with a lens of processing, it's amazing how many parts of our lives fall into that. Besides, just food, which is an obvious and somewhat unhealthy one. So we've got our work cut out for us. There's a lot of things we can do better, but I love it that you're finding whole food sources of the nutrients you need, like bone broth. That's a great source of collagen.
Plus, it's hard. You found products like they're kind of affordable, and some other products they're super expensive, and you're like, how I can get in the middle, because I don't want to buy the super cheaper ones. I don't know how processed, what it is.
Right.
But either these ones that they say like Miracle, they're so expensive.
Right.
Right. And I just like every time I'm going there, like, you know what? Forget it. Nothing better than the natural. And I start doing that myself. But that requires time.
Time, yeah. A lot of attention, a lot of time.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Wow.
It's a lot of effort.
Okay, so good. There's so many things you said that I love telling stories, okay? So sometimes, when you say something, it inspires, like it reminds me of a certain story. But one of them, and again, right, I tend to be kind of silly, but I love stories, and sometimes there's a moral in behind the stories, right? But one, as you're saying, we're aging and we're kind of like losing maybe that cognitive, ability to just multitask. And I also tell my kids, sometimes I forget maybe their friend's name or somebody's name. And I'm like, I have it right here. I know it starts with a T or, or so forth and so forth. But one time, I told him, I'm 43 years old. There's a lot of names I've learned throughout my life, and you guys are 11, 12, 13. And maybe the amount of names you have to learn, it's minimum in comparison to the names I've learned, right? So just taking that into account, right? Sometimes I think, as we age, we just have experienced so much, right? And it's interesting how the brain, trying to keep up with memories and stuff, like which memories, it's almost like which memories are worth keeping, right? Even though they might be there in the unconscious or subconscious. It's so interesting, but like which memories are worth keeping and which memories are like just kind of like set it aside. It was an experience you had, but just kind of like put it aside. Even like negative ones, and that's so interesting. When I think about like traumatic events and stuff, like can you put some of them aside? And I've heard and I've talked to other psychologists, and they said, you need to learn to rewire like some of those learnings, right? So I'm like, wow, it's so interesting. Like the brain, the memories, and even like you're saying right now, like we can take action and almost like maybe shape the way our future can be and our memory can be, right? So that to me is just so marvelous and important. And the other thing, as you were talking, it's like, wow, the US is so systematic, right? And how you're saying, you start getting fat because of the lifestyle you're living. Well, guess what? Now there's gym memberships, right? That in a sense, it's genius strategy, right? Because America is capitalist after all. So we're always thinking about ways to monetize life.
Right.
Right.
To survive.
To survive or to whatever, right?
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. Like, here's the industry that makes bills. Here's the industry to get fit. Here's the industry of like anything. It's an industry and it's a system. And that's so American, right? And I don't think it's like anything. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's like AI, right? You can use it for good and you can use it for bad. So many things are like that. So anyways, that's kind of like a little bit of what goes through my brain, as we're talking. And but okay, so I want to talk about Jesus, right? We're in the Christian podcast, and I also tend to kind of like play with my kids and say, what do you think about this? And then I throw in an idea, right? So in regards to the brain, this is something we've all heard maybe growing up or at some point in school, where it says that as humans, we only use a small percentage of the full capability of our brain, right? So, I mean, some people say we're only using 10% of our brain. I mean, one question is that true? But another question that I like to ask my kids is, if it's true, do you think Jesus utilized 100% of his brain? So what do you think, Terry?
That's a great question. Well, you're right. We don't use all of our brain. We have, I've like billions of cells. It's just amazing. Billions of cells with trillions of connections. And I think when you talk about those kinds of numbers, I mean, it has to be from the creator, and it has to be a God who created that. I mean, to think that that came from one little cell, like hooking up with another cell, and like it's designed. It's just so clear. There's no way it's not designed. What a stimulating question, though, to think if Jesus used his whole brain. I would say yes. I mean, I think there are a lot of things in our world that we don't understand. And then so sometimes people kind of tend to think they don't exist. One thing I would bring up as an example of that is frequency. Clearly plants have frequency, trees have frequency. You can measure the trees, olive trees frequency, and it's actually a healing frequency. And cells respond to frequency. And to me, it's really clear that God created frequency. I mean, he's given frequency to everything living in the world. How do we understand how to utilize that? We don't know yet. But so I imagine that Jesus would have used his whole brain because he had the knowledge of all of the things in the universe that we can't see, that we don't know how to measure, that we don't understand. We're starting to utilize things like that in terms of healing or helping the body heal itself. But there's just so much that's been created for us that we don't know. There's so many compounds on the earth yet that we haven't discovered how they would help our body. I mean, I really do believe that everything we need to heal ourselves was put here. And so we've found a lot of those, but there's a lot of things we don't even realize why they're here, how they could help us.
It is such an amazing question, but something to come to my mind is he was fully human, right? Jesus was fully human. And remember when he was praying to God, he's ready to go on the cross, and he asked God, is another way? Like, are you sure this is the way that I need to go and die in that cross? He was praying to him, and he knew, you're God, you have the Spirit in you. So it's kind of, he was fully human. He knew. But he also was praying to him. It's other way. Because he knew what he's going to face, in the future, in the cross. The Bible was saying that he was all deformed. He doesn't look like a human. It's like, it's so painful what they did to him, right? He knew. But he prayed, it's another way. Yeah. You was such a human, we ask God, like, I just want to go there, but it's like somewhere where I can go fast. Why I need to go
Take
for
a
all
shortcut.
this? Like, can we just go directly? It's like, no, this is my way. And, we need to clean, or we need to cut branches that you don't need. And it's going to be painful, but it's the only way for you to mature.
Wow. Yeah. So much of the way of life is kind of like that, right? Like God says somewhere in scripture, I always say it's there, right? You can look it up, but it says, I am the vine, you are the branches, right? It's one of the gospels, but it's so interesting that God uses like language that we can understand. It's almost like it's in biology, right? You can see a tree, and you can, like, people that maybe are arborists, they know, okay, in order to get better fruit, I might need to cut some branches, right? And in this sense, like he's saying, I'm the vine, like I produce life. You are the branches, and I'm the one that needs to trim parts of you to maybe perfect you and help you give better fruit. And to me, that's kind of why I was asking this question, because the example of Jesus, like you're saying, Millie, like as he's praying in Gethsemane, and he's saying, is there another way, right? And I just marvel at Jesus's brain and attitude to face what we as humans tend to avoid or want to avoid, right? So in that sense, as we kind of like bring it back to the conversation of brain health, do you think we're maybe as humans just trying to avoid aging? Do you think that we'll ever get to the point where like we're just living longer with healthy brains? I think ultimately when we look at the science and everything, people want to live longer and maybe even forever, right? If they could. Do you see value in that? Because we're trying to get healthy, right? And you're saying I don't want to age with dementia, which is great. But why are we doing that? Just because we want to just live longer, live forever? What's your take on that? Like the heart behind why we're making these decisions.
Right. I think it's because however many days we have, we want to live them well. And we don't, of course, know how many days we have. And for a while I can just speak to the US. We were living longer. And so it made sense. Like, well, we're living longer and we don't want to have dementia during our old age because we're living so much longer. Now our lifespan is actually starting to decrease again.
Oh, wow.
There is quite a community of people who are interested in longevity. There are a lot of biohackers that are just kind of normal, average people. And then there's some like tech guys who are into biohacking. And I think those are the people who are trying to live like 300 years. So
wow.
I'm a little more fearful of technology, and I'm not sure I want to be on the earth longer than I'm supposed to. It should be predetermined already. So I don't know if they'll be able to beat what's supposed to happen. But I think it's just a case of living your days without being a burden on your family, being able to experience the joy that God has given us. You're talking about nature, and so clearly in the Bible, God always comes to us in nature and uses nature as an analogy for other things we want to learn. And another analogy where God has used the mechanism of pruning is actually in the brain. The brain has a pruning mechanism.
Wow.
Which is kind of crazy that you just brought that up, because
Yes.
I was just kind of couldn't believe you were having that conversation. So when we grow a new neuron, a brain cell, it branches out like a shrub, and it has tons of branches, and each of those branches is trying to connect to another neuron. And the way it connects is by learning something new or doing something new. If it's a motor one, it would be by movement that would reinforce it, connecting with another neuron that it can communicate with. And then after that happens, there's a pruning mechanism that comes through and prunes off all the extra branches that didn't connect to another nerve.
Wow.
So, he's done that in, nature. He's done that in our brains. I can't speak to if there's a similar mechanism elsewhere in the body that I'm not familiar with. There very well could be, but in the brain, there certainly is. It's called, oh shoot. I have to. It'll come back. See,
it'll come back.
Missing.
Yeah,
I'm not worried to have Alzheimer's. But there's a word for that specific pruning mechanism in the brain, which I think is fascinating.
It is fascinating. Okay, so I'm not a scientist, right? But I love like synapses, right?
Synapses. Yeah.
Synapses, and it's fascinating, but. Have humans actually seen neurons connect to each other? Is that something like we're aware because there's studies, or is there like a microscope who has seen like neurons doing that in the branches? Is that something that has been actually seen like on a microscope, or is that?
Yeah, so we've seen that under a microscope, and so we even know some of the specific compounds and hormones that help foster those connections.
That's intense.
Yeah, okay. And they've even noticed that we can grow new nerve cells when we're older. We didn't used to think that. But there was a really interesting study in Sweden where they were able to, it had to do with, I think it was chemotherapy that they had used in some patients. So they could tell if the neuron had existed before the chemotherapy or if it was new after. And so they were able to measure neurons that were not in existence when there was this certain marker of a medication on board. So it was really
that's fascinating.
So much hope.
Yes.
Right?
Because I remember, like growing up, like I think in high school, that's when we're talking about the brain and neurons and all of that.
They will tell us that no.
Right.
Because I remember like the knowledge was, if you lose your brain cells, they don't come back. And there was something like, for like example, alcohol, like, it's going to damage some of your brain cells and they're not coming back. Or if you hit your head too hard, which, I mean, you cannot get it, right? You hit it too hard. I mean, you might have a concussion or problems. But so you're saying they can grow back?
We do grow new neurons, but they often aren't enough of them to make up for something like a concussion or a brain injury or a stroke. It's not enough. I mean, they do grow, but it's not very vigorous. So we do want to hang on to the ones that we have.
Okay, so it's still important.
Yeah, it's still important, and it's just not an absolute that we don't grow any new neurons.
So don't YOLO just yet and say, you only live once and go for it, right? Okay, that makes sense. That's so cool. Okay, the brain is super interesting. So tell us about some of the action steps maybe we can take to, as Christians, take better care of our brains.
Yeah, I mean, we are commanded to take care of our bodies, and that includes our brain. So one of the areas that I think is really important is cutting down on sugar. So the average American is eating about 70 grams of added sugar a day. And I follow the American Heart Association guidelines because what's healthy for the heart is also healthy for the brain. And they recommend not more than 36 grams a day for men and 24 grams a day for women. So most of us have a bit of work to do to cut that down. And I'm not suggesting that people are, having that would be 17 teaspoons of sugar, of added sugar a day. It's quite a lot of sugar. And it's not that we're adding that ourselves to things. People aren't having it in their coffee in general. It's coming in all those processed foods and even some foods that don't seem sweet. So it's obvious if we're having a muffin for breakfast, obviously there's going to be added sugar there, or a donut or something like that. But a lot of foods that seem not sugary have sugar added. Like, for example, wheat toast. Most wheat toast has added sugar. And there's a particularly by the label, it would look to me to be very healthy. And there's 5 grams of added sugar per slice. So if we're waking up and having toast with our eggs, that's already 10 grams of sugar. And we don't feel like we had
even the bacon.
Yes, some
sugar.
Bacon has sugar. It's crazy.
Because I did keto for more than a year.
So you were really reading labels.
So I was reading labels, was on ketosis it was not sustainable for me because I really, really love fruit. And I was missing that. So it's pretty hard. I care less about cakes, pie, cookies, especially American cookies, like so much sugar.
Yeah.
Like it's, I will prefer a Mexican bread that it's baked, have like half of the sugar probably, and still bad for you. Have sugar,
The conchitas.
Yeah, it was so hard. That's so hard, to get rid of the sugar. So
yeah, and I'm sure you found some really surprising sources. Like I used to think before I really started reading labels, I liked this. It was like a chai protein drink, and so I was like, oh, I'm a middle-aged woman. I'm trying to get extra protein and I don't have time to eat a meal, but I'll have this protein drink because that's healthy. And I wasn't reading the labels. And then when I started to become more aware of the connection between sugar and brain disease, I started reading labels. And this protein drink had 45 grams of added sugar. I mean, I could have had 2 cups of Haagen-Dazs for that. It's just a crazy amount of sugar. And so once I started reading labels and just making smarter choices, most of the time I didn't miss the sugar because I don't need to eat crackers with sugar. There's so many sources where I feel like we can cut some of those out. So we want to have a treat. I'm with you. Like I don't need to have the processed cookies that are everywhere, just, on a table because we're having a meeting. But if we make homemade cookies, especially if my daughter makes them because she uses brown butter. It's so good. I'm going to have those cookies. And, so I can avoid all the sources I didn't even appreciate. So I can have something I enjoy here or there. My family's tradition is to make toffee at Christmas. And that's, half butter, half sugar. So it's quite a lot of sugar. But I'd rather have a little piece or two of toffee than the wheat bread that's I didn't even know it had sugar added to it. So, just making some smart choices. And that's, I don't want to encourage people to try to go totally off sugar overnight. They won't be successful. They'll rebound. They'll feel disappointed. And it's not about that level of perfection. It's about making progress. So little changes. And what happens when people cut out those sources where they didn't even appreciate there was sugar? Like I keep just saying wheat toast. It's such an easy example because, for example, sourdough toast generally doesn't have sugar. But once you start to cut out those constant little bits of sugar, the palate starts to return to more of a savory palate. Like you're suggesting, like our American sweets are so overly sweet, they're not even good. And so then once you start to cut out the sugars, you start to recognize how they're not very satisfying. And it's like a sicky sweet. And so then it just kind of accelerates and feeds on itself and reinforces itself that you don't like those things that are too sweet.
Like for me, having my dark coffee with cinnamon is sweet enough.
Yes, cinnamon is such a great way to get sugar out of coffee. That's, Yeah, I used sugar because I used to have sugar and cream in my coffee every morning. And because I'm also, one of the other interventions is kind of eating later in the morning, trying to spread out that fasting that you do at night. And so I had to get rid of the coffee because we get up at 4:50 and I need my coffee at 5. So switching to black coffee, the cinnamon was really useful in getting the sugar out. And cinnamon is such a healthy compound. It's another one of those things that's here for us on earth. It has so many health benefits.
Yes.
It is so helpful, it's a lot of people like you, they care now, and I feel like a lot of people is waking up. Like what is really good for me. And thanks to, all the information in YouTube, most of the info we found, it's good. We know that it's so hard because I feel like I've been practicing all the diets you can find online. Okay, I'm gonna do paleo, keto, and I tried all this, and I found out that every diet works for different to any person. So, but at the end of the day, trying to improve and be better, we all have this knowledge out there. So that's why I love your book and what you're doing. It's like a guideline, like how to start, because we can get overwhelmed with all this information, and I have that, but what is next? How I apply that? Because one day I wake up, it's like, I'm no sugar today, and I try to, I'm extreme, so I say no sugar is no sugar, right? But then when I'm out of that mentality, I go full and whatever I'm gonna grab and eat and bring to my mouth. I go to no exercise, no eating good, to fully exercise and super strict on my diet.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know who you are as you do. My husband has your personality type where he's super extreme. He's CrossFitting. He's done that hard 75, which is, it's so extreme, but he can do the extreme stuff, but moderation is not his strong point. So he has
like
to,
Millie.
he has to do it either all or nothing, but he can't say like, I'm just going to cut back a little on this or, and for me, I'm a moderator, so I am much easier to cut back a little bit. So for people who have your more extreme, like you need almost like a challenge. Like if it's a challenge, we'll do it.
Yes.
You can just run through the whole thing and just go to the end of the list and just adopt all of them at once. But you're kind of a rare bird. So that's a unique personality type where you have that like challenge mentality. And sometimes when you have that challenge mentality, you can get yourself into a little trouble because you can be so harsh on your body so fast with exercise or with a change in diet. Like sometimes, it can the challenge can actually be a little bit harmful sometimes. Yeah. So I'm sure you've learned to moderate.
I'm trying to learn, and apply that. It is hard. And I have one more question. Like now fasting is a thing. Everybody do intermittent fasting or they fast for 3 days. And, so I was trying to combine all of them, to try to, I want to connect with God. I found people on the Bible where they fast for 21 days, 40 days. They did it twice. Jesus did it for 40 days. And I thought, you know what? I have the Holy Spirit in me. I can do this. So I fast for 21 days.
Wow.
And I did like master cleanse. You know, it's like I was drinking water with maple syrup and lime and cayenne pepper and some salt in the morning.
Okay.
You know, so I flush everything. And I did it for 4 years. You know,
Once a year, you did it 21
once a
days?
year. You're the expert. So one time, you know, these past years, I did it twice in 1 year. But the last one, I was like, I'm going to do it for 40 days and just water.
Wow.
I think I damaged my body a little bit.
Okay.
Because I was losing the hair. I started feeling like exciting. Like, what is this? I'm super nervous and nothing is happening. Like, you're going to present a test. That was how I was feeling. Bad. Like, this is not normal in me. You know, what's going on? I don't have a reason to feel how I am feeling. This is my normal life. I was driving to church to set up the coffee. That's something I do every Sunday. And I'm super nervous. Like, somebody's going to die. I'm going to, you know, like, crazy.
Yeah.
And everything, you know, my mom died with cancer. And it's some people believes that when you're fasting, you just flush all the toxicity it's been in your body, you know, for what we eating, even vegetables, you know, and if sometimes it's hard to consume all organic because the prices, you know, go crazy. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to stop eating broccoli because it's expensive. I'm just going to buy whatever I can right now with my budget, better than nothing, right? And so I followed that. I just don't want to die with cancer like my mom did. So I want to do whatever it's on my side to protect myself, you know. So I'm going to do this once a year, but I don't know how I affect my brain by doing that, you know.
Yeah, it's a good question. And fasting there's so much data about fasting and cancer. Because cancer really does need sugar to grow. And there's also a lot of data on cancer with a ketogenic diet, ketosis. I mean, it goes back to biblical times, actually, the fasting and the using ketosis to treat disease. In the Bible, it treats epilepsy. And we still see that. I mean, there's certain kinds of infantile type seizures where we'd put kids on a ketogenic diet in the hospital. It's hard to continue once they're out and about in the world because wherever they go, they're going to bump into sugar. But when they're in a really controlled environment, it's easier to do. So for cancer, I mean, doing a prolonged fast really does starve those cells. They can't survive without caloric input, especially from sugar. So, you know, I think that it's quite reasonable to do that as long as you're not fasting too long. I mean, and the question would be, how long does the fast need to be to starve any potential cancerous cells that are in your body? I don't know the answer to that question because I haven't done enough of a literature search on cancer. But your body sure was telling you that it was too long, clearly.
Because I did it twice a year.
Yeah.
The first one I did it for 21 days with my maple syrup, lime, and cayenne pepper. And the second one, in the middle of the year, I did it just water for 25 days.
Right.
And the thing was not right away. I finished my fast pretty good. You know, I was drinking a lot of coconut water and the broth of the veggies. You know, every day is like we add a little bit more because you can consume food right away.
Right.
So I did everything perfect. But after 3 months, that's when my body was like, I was having all my hair in my hands. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
You know, I'm feeling nervous. And that's when I went to the store and bought all these vitamins. That I love to eat an avocado. I want to have the nutrients, you know, from whole foods. So I never consumed these pills, but I was like, I feel like I need them.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know where is my hormones. Plus, I'm 43. You know, I feel like I have the premenopause. And I noticed my cycle was different too. So a lot of changes on my body.
Yeah.
I would just worry, like, because a lot of people, you know, they're not educated or they will think that fasting I mean, Beto was so worried. My kids, like, you're going to die.
Yeah, I mean, you clearly weren't getting enough nutrients to support your normal, bodily functions. If your cycle is getting off, that's a pretty good sign that it's too prolonged or too severe. And so what I talk about in the book is not doing such a significant fast, but trying to get back to just more how we used to eat, which would be getting a break between dinner and breakfast of 12 hours at a minimum, but trying to get that to either 14 or 15 hours in between, because you can get some of that cellular cleaning mechanism even in that time. Your cells, once they stop seeing sugar, which takes a long time after you finish your last meal, then they'll switch to cleaning and repair. And so what's happening a lot in our society now is that people are eating dinner and they're having a lot of carbohydrates. So they've got a lot of sugar calories in their dinner, and then maybe they're having a dessert or wine after dinner too. And then they're getting up early and eating breakfast that has carbohydrate in it. And so their body, that whole time they're sleeping, is still seeing sugar and it's still pumping out insulin. And so our body's not sensitive to insulin, and that's kind of driving our diabetes epidemic. But then when you have insulin, all your cells are getting the signal, grow, 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 and they're all in growth mode. And so once you get a break from sugar, then the cells can relax and get the message of, okay, now it's time to repair and get rid of all the damaged proteins that are here and clean up. And so that's one of the best parts of fasting. And so even for people who do like 2 or 3 days, you're really getting a lot of that cleaning mechanism in your body. 21 days, certainly probably cleaned up about everything. But, just at least getting the break from sugar is so good for us. And I'm sure you noticed that you had amazing focus when you were doing that.
I love it. That's, people think that it's super hard. And I tell them, actually, it's so easy.
And the focus is amazing.
Because you're so focused. I had a lot of energy.
Yep.
I'm not changing anything. I'm cooking 3 times a day for my kids. Of course, I have cravings, but I'm not hungry.
Yeah, it's
different.
Kind of counterintuitive, when that you have more energy.
Oh, I'm hungry. That disappear. I'm just, I saw the food and I'm cravings, but I'm not hungry anymore after the 7 day of fasting, just water. And I just love it. I just love it.
Yeah,
it's because I'm extreme.
Yeah.
It's not that difficult. I love the feeling of have a lot of energy and focus.
Yeah, and I think that's the focus is something that I concentrate on a lot with my patients, especially the people who are doing preventative brain health management, because so you're in your 40s and your 50s and you're adopting all these habits, and it's some work and some effort, and then it's like, how do you know if it's working? Now we have to wait 40 years to find out if we don't get Alzheimer's. And so really the surrogate marker for that is focus and attention. And so when people start to incorporate that fasting, notable focus, decreased sugar, brain fog goes away, they'll notice that they're functioning better today. And so that's kind of the marker. Like, it's like a retirement account.
Yeah.
If you're saving money for your retirement, how do you know it's going to be there? Well, because you can look at it now. You can see the money's in the account. Like, how do you do that for brain health? Like, how do you know you're going to get a benefit in 40 years? And so that's kind of how you can check.
Even,
feel good.
I go every year to do my check, and I go to doctor, and I have this, I have that, and my tests come all clean. You're wonderful. Keep doing whatever you're doing. Keep doing that, because, you don't have anything yet. Like, I don't feel that great, but probably I'm doing something good.
Yeah, it sounds like you are,
fabulous.
definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, it's been great conversation. Awesome. I think as a Christian, I just want to invite people, to say the Bible invites us to aspire to have self-control, right? That's one of the fruits of the Spirit. And I think, as a society, we are really addicted to sugar, and maybe think beyond sugar and think about sweets, and even think about beyond sweets and think about, I just like the feeling. I just love this thing, and so many things are like that, I mean, in another episode, we were discussing how as a society, we're also addicted to sex, and it's a big problem, huge problem, right? And there's states now that are coming up with like, hey, we got to block a certain sites because anybody has access, even children who are under 18 have access to these things. So it speaks so much about the problems we have as humans, as a society, you know, and I think God is inviting us to take care of our brains. He's inviting us to care. I mean, just like the pruning example, right? The brain works like that too. You know, it prunes different branches. So what an invitation to say to people, God wants to take care of you, but you need to take action too. And part of doing that is, I mean, start with your brain, start with cutting down on some sugars, and maybe the invitation, like Millie's saying, you know, maybe an invitation. Like to me, I today I feel like I want to take fasting more seriously, with a spiritual purpose, but also with a physical purpose. Why not? And so invite people to that. You know, it's practicing, right? Everything requires, if you want to get good at anything, it's going to require practice. So if you want to get good at self-control, you got to practice. And I know there's so much grace around this area, you know, because sugar is everywhere, you know, and it's sweet and we like it. But start taking some steps, right, to practice abstinence from sugar, right? And like you're saying, like to me, the perfect example was coffee, because I think just the invitation right now, you know, if you're a big coffee drinker and you love it with sugar on top of the cream and all of that, it's like start taking it without that. You're still drinking coffee, and you start finding out that it's actually really yummy when you drink like black coffee with a little bit of cinnamon, or just black coffee itself. It's yummy, right? But you got to discover that. And I think in many other areas of our lives, you know, if you start cutting down on those things and practicing self-control, you're going to start finding that, oh, it's actually really good. Now I'm focusing. Now I'm finding like this strength that I didn't know I could have. So what better call as Christians to do that, right? And to take care of our brains and our bodies.
Yeah, and not just that, our bodies are the home for the Holy Spirit.
The temple.
It's a holy place. Our body is holy, you know, because He lives in us. So how we want to maintain His home? Mm-hmm. Beautiful, clean, right? So it's an invitation for me this morning, you know, to focus on who is God and what He's doing in my life. And He always, He wants us to enjoy life, you know, and have that joy and happiness. And I think He gives us all the resources, and He is preparing people like you, doctor, that work so hard to bring us like look, you can do this. You know, thank you so much. We're gonna put the link here, so where you can buy the book, and you know, where we can find you, you know, too.
The website's just brainhealthactionplan.com. And the book's on Amazon, so it's easy to find.
Amazing. Yes, let's
So
do
good.
it together. We can do this.
Yes, we can do this. Friends, well, thank you so much. Thank you, Teryn, Dr. Teryn Clarke, for being here, for being on the show, for shedding some light, opening our minds to this is so helpful and so much hope. And I want to invite, for those of you who tune in, listen to this episode, to like, subscribe, share this episode with a friend. Visit us on ChristianPodcast.com. We have English and Spanish episodes with yours truly, Beto and Millie. Thank you for being here. We'll see you guys on the next one.
Ciao.